Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, where we will be covering everything that you've been asking us that you want to know about in terms of the 25-26 GP contract, what to expect and how to prepare. What we're going to be covering today is a general overview of the GP contract, which I'll deliver, responding to the questions that you've submitted in advance. And then I'll hand over to my colleague Rob, who will take you through some of the legal questions that you asked in advance about this new contract. And then finally, I'll hand you over to my colleague Monty, who will talk you through how you might be able to ensure your practice or your PCN against some of those sort of legal questions and those legal risks, particularly those associated with online consulting and employment risks. So by way of introduction, my name's Dr. Clare Sieber. I'm a GP based down in West Sussex, and I'm Chief Medical Officer of the Well-Led Practice, or the Well-Led Provider, which is part of Redmore Health. I have some LMC experience, and I also sit on GPC England, so I'm fairly close to what's going on with the GP contract. And my colleagues Rob and Monty, I'll get them to introduce themselves when they come onto their section, just for the sake of time, because we've got so much that we want to get through, and you asked us to get through in this webinar this afternoon. As it said on the video before, the slides will be sent to you afterwards with the recording by email. Absolutely everybody who's registered will get copies of those afterwards, so no need to be taking notes or taking screenshots. And if you want to ask some questions live, then you can pop those in the chat or the Q&A box. I'm sorry if we don't get round to them all, but we'll do our best to, or we will try and get back to you afterwards. So long as you're not anonymous when you're logged in here, we'll be able to get back to you by email. Our email addresses are also on the slides at the end for you. This isn't the first webinar that we've done as a kind of motley crew. Our most popular one to date was one about PCN incorporation and whether it was worth doing and what the risks and the benefits might have been. And when you get the slides, if you want to watch that, you can click on the link, or if you want to look at the slides briefly, you can do so there. I don't want it to play. There we are. So on to the meaty bit, which is answering some of your general questions about the GP contract. So these are the kind of headline summary. We've got £969 million of new investment coming in this year, 880 million of which is coming into either the GP contract or the PCN DES. And then there's 80 million, which is coming in through what's called the advice and guidance DES. And this is on top of the 400 odd million that came into the GP contract last autumn, which was a result of the DDRB uplift. So it's on top of that. One of the big changes this year is to the ARRS allocation for PCNs. There is now one single ARRS allocation per PCN, which can be used to employ any of the ARRS roles that fit underneath it in whatever combination you like. GPs are included as they were before, but their minimum salary and on-cost reimbursement has increased within the ARRS reimbursement package, and practice nurses are now welcome in the ARRS roles from bands 5 to 8 included, and also band 3 HCAs. There are some limitations on those, but that's the kind of headline around the ARRS changes. We have now this advice and guidance pre-referral payment coming in through an item of service payment of £20 per request by GPs. We have an uplift to the SFE, which is a statement of financial entitlements. So practices will get more now for locum reimbursement for maternity, paternity, parental leave and sickness leave. And there's also an uplift in the SFE to the childhood immunisation payments of about £2. There is a new requirement coming in from the 1st of October, where practices must allow patients to submit routine non-urgent appointment requests, medication queries and admin requests via online consultation tools throughout during core hours. There's been some significant changes to QOF, which I'll go into more detail shortly because there were a lot of questions submitted by you in advance about QOF. But there are 32 QOF indicators that are now permanently retired, but some of the points from those QOF indicators that have been retired haven't been recycled into global sum, but have instead been added to the 9 existing CBD indicators. And those CBD indicators now have a higher upper threshold, so they're a little bit more difficult to achieve. The other change is to the capacity and access improvement payment, which is split into 2 parts. There's still a part focused on access, and there's now a part focused on using population health risk stratification tools. I'm not going to cover so much about the capacity access improvement payment because I think there was only one question from all 700 people who registered about that. So that will be something I won't be able to cover, I'm afraid. The context of all of this, and you can play this video in your own time when you get the slides, is that the only reason this 25-26 contract was accepted by the BMA's General Practitioners Committee of England was that Wes Streeting put in writing that he commits to negotiating a brand new wholesale GP contract in this Parliament, because what the BMA have heard from grassroots GPs through their representative bodies and local medical committees is that we feel that the General Medical Services contract is no longer fit for purpose. It's over 20 years old, and so the government have committed to negotiating a completely new contract, and that's why this contract for 25-26 has been accepted. That's Katie getting animated there. So on to some of your questions now, so we can dive into that in a little bit more detail. There are a lot of questions about the money and specifically trying to pick out new money from old money, I suppose. So this is my attempt to answer your questions. In terms of the global sum, what we're seeing is an 8.26% uplift to the global sum, an extra £9.29 now added to the global sum per weighted patient. So that is now sitting at £121.79. However, just like there was last year with that 400 odd million that I mentioned in the autumn, this year in 25-26 at a similar time, there could be another in-year uplift to reflect a DDRB award, which can then contribute towards partner and staff pay increases. What is new money into practices? That is a question that we got asked many times, and this is my attempt to split it up. I've split it up in terms of new money coming directly to practices and new money coming directly to PCNs. So for practices, there's that global sum uplift. There's the advice and guidance DES, that £20 per piece of activity. There's the uplift to the vaccination and immunisation payments, and there's the uplift to the sickness and parental leave reimbursement entitlements. And all that's coming to is about £754 million. So that's going into practice, and that is new money. In addition, there's new money going into PCNs, which may then filter down to practices depending on how your PCN operates, of which there is the ARRS uplift, including the GPs, as I mentioned, and another £41 million of other PCN payments. So an uplift to the network participation payment, an uplift to the enhanced access payment, which now sits around £8.60, I think, per patient, and an uplift to the care home bed premium. A further question we got is to explain what's happening to QOF in a bit more detail. So I'll attempt to do this in this slide and then the next couple of slides. So there are 32 QOF indicators, which last year were income protected, and those are going to be permanently retired. So we don't need to worry about doing the work associated with those 32 QOF indicators. There was about 212 points associated with those, which amounted to about £298 million. So 71 of those points, which conveniently comes to £100 million, has been recycled into the global sum. But of course, that's not new money, that £100 million, because it's £100 million we were getting last year in QOF. So that's not new money, and that's not included in the £969 million. So the remaining 141 points from those retired indicators that has not been recycled into global sum is being redistributed across the existing 9 CVD indicators that we've had last year in QOF. And as this table points out, the maximum thresholds for those indicators has been raised. So it's now a little bit harder to get the maximum for QOF for those indicators. And this table is a nice summary of where we were last year, what the threshold is this year, and how many points are associated this year compared to last year. So you can be confident you know what you're doing with QOF. I'll read out this question kind of word for word. When you offset what we lose in QOF indicators and the potential to achieve this with the threshold increases to the uplift in global summer practices actually any better off? So in terms of QOF and the bottom line on QOF, the QOF points which haven't been recycled are going to be harder to achieve, that's for sure. One LMC, and I've put the link down there if you want to have a look at their analysis in more detail, has calculated that if you don't change your QOF practices, so you still carry on as if you're trying to achieve last year and doing the work that you were doing last year to achieve last year's QOF, then you may lose on average £1.7 per patient, mainly due to the COL 004 indicator, which is taking up the majority. So that might be one that practices want to focus on this year if you're wanting to change your QOF practices to make sure you achieve that. But of course, that's only the bottom line for sort of QOF. That's not the bottom line for the whole entire practice. And I will come on to the bottom line for the whole entire practice a little bit later on. There seems to be a little bit of confusion about childhood immunisation and whether it's part of QOF. It is. We were asked if there'd been any discussions about allowing a dissent code when parents refuse to have their children vaccinated, because it has a huge impact on what you can achieve with QOF. One child that you can't get immunised because their parents refuse can mean you're hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds out of pocket. The answer is yes, it was asked for, but it's not something that we were able to get in this contract. But it's an issue that everybody knows about. We also got asked whether there are any useful software systems or other things going around that can help you manage the more challenging cholesterol and hypertension, so the CVD targets. And yes, there's loads of stuff out there, actually. There are pieces of software that will identify the who that you need to be doing and the what you need to be doing to them. But I think most of us are familiar with those now. But there's also software that can capture data remotely for patients using sort of forms, or there are even managed services where somebody can do a clinician-led review for you to make sure you're achieving your QOF, and that can be funded through ARRS. So there is absolutely loads of stuff out there, and we can talk to you more about that if you want. So down to the overall bottom line, which is what the majority of the questions that we got were asking about. This question, in simple terms, what is the impact on my practice's bottom line? I picked that one up because I thought it was a nice one. Firstly, there is no simple way of working out or saying what the impact is on your practice's bottom line, because GP funding is not at all in any way simple. As we've kind of reflected, there's lots of different funding streams. There's capitation payments, there's voluntary incentive schemes, local ones, national ones. We've got item of service payments, and then we've got the PCN stuff on top. So there's no simple way of working it out. By far the biggest issue this year is going to be the effect of the increase in the employers' national insurance contributions and the national living and national minimum wage increases. And on top of that, some practices have said that they will choose to maintain the wage differential between all of their staff members, so uplifting everyone's pay when those at the bottom of the pay scale get theirs uplifted by this mandatory uplift. And only you, I guess, can calculate, therefore, what the effect of this is going to be on your bottom line. Only you know how many employees you have, whether they're on full-time or part-time contracts, and what pay they're on at the moment. I'll come on in a minute into how you might be able to do that for yourself. But this table that's on the right-hand side of this slide, again, it's a published public domain analysis from an LMC of what this might mean to a practice's bottom line. So it's got in there the uplift to the global sum, the SFE, the vaccinations and immunisations, the advice and guidance DARES, what's coming into the PCN that's new, the ARRS uplift, and then it's got going out there on the other side of the chart, the QOF losses, the QOF recycle, and an estimate of the impact of the national insurance contributions and national living wage and minimum wage losses. But that doesn't include also maintaining any wage differentials, and that's just an average from that LMC's particular area. BBO is Bucks, Berkshire and Oxfordshire. So when they put all of that into their calculator, based on what their practices have told them, they're getting to a net position of £7.50 to £8.50 per patient. But I've just seen somebody there putting in the chat, I'm sorry, I'm not keeping up on top of it as much as I hoped I would be. How do we work this out individually for our practice? Well, one of the things that you might want to do if you don't want to sort of bother your accountant would be to join the Medics Money webinar, which is tomorrow evening, conveniently. For those of you that don't know, Medics Money is run by Andy Powell, who is a well-known ASMA accountant, and his GP colleague, Tommy Perkins, who lives just down the road from me. And they have specifically said that one of the things they're going to be talking about on their webinar tomorrow is how you can try and work this out for your practice and what tools are out there to help you do that. And they'll do an even more in-depth analysis, I'm sure, because one of the people on that will be an accountant of the financial kind of impact of this contract and those NICs and living wage rises. So if you scan that QR code now, you'll be able to access the registration link for that webinar. And I'll try and stick the link in the chat in a moment, but it's tomorrow evening. So I will now hand over to Rob, who will talk you through the answers to some of the legal questions that we got from you when you were filling in your forms at the beginning. You're on mute, Rob.
Sorry. Thanks very much, Claire. I'm just rearranging my screens quickly. So yes, my name is Robert McCartney. I'm an associate here at Hempsons in the primary care team. I know quite a few of you will be aware, but some of you don't know, we've got one of the biggest primary care teams in the country, and our main focus is dealing with anything kind of practice-based, PCN-based relationships, contracting, incorporation, etc. Now, this was a really interesting kind of period of time because we've had all this guidance come through, but we are waiting, as so often the case is, for the definitive contract. Last year, you may recall that the actual documentation didn't come out until effectively into April. And in fact, the actual GMS contract that went kind of was effective from the 1st of April 2024 wasn't published until I believe it was either September or October of 2024. So I'm hoping that we will get something out to clarify some of the points that we'll be kind of discussing. But there are some kind of recurring themes and kind of key questions that are coming up, which we can certainly give guidance on at this stage whilst we wait for the kind of definitive information to come through. So we're going to focus on 4 key questions here. The first is about what should be considered for PCNs planning changes following amendments to the ARRS funding. And I noticed in the comments that one of the questions was specifically asking about redundancy to recruit other roles. So we will address that in a moment. I then want to just mention the increased access to online services and whether or not it creates a risk to the practices. 2 other bits which maybe haven't had the attention that some of the other points have had, which I want to touch upon, is about GP Connect access and the changes that are coming through from there. And then finally, but not something that I think's got much attention, But the implementation of the patient safety strategy and its impact on practices, it seems to be one of those things that's definitely gone underneath the radar, but potentially has quite a big impact on how practices will be operating. So, first question about PCNs and future planning. So, I'm referring to the three R's, predominantly the I've gone with restructure, redundancy, and responsibility. Should really be liability, but I really wanted it to be an R, so I went for responsibility. Under restructure, if you are considering making changes to your workforce and your PCN services, almost on a fairly simple perspective of saying, if we remove some of these posts and we specifically bring in other posts, the question is, have you really done the planning that's required to actually do the detailed kind of analysis of what the impact of that might be? Many PCNs operate fairly complex arrangements now, whereas the ARRS staff, for example, you might be funding for the ARRS staff, but they might also be providing your enhanced access. They might be providing services within your care home. They might be providing some of the other kind of PCN objectives. So simply saying be removing one set of workforce to replace them with another workforce is likely to be kind of a high risk approach. So I would always recommend that if you are looking at making any significant changes along those lines, that you start with a proper kind of restructure approach. Ensure that you actually understand what the impact of the changes are going to be. How will this impact on the services that the PCNs are supposed to be delivering? How will it impact on the individual practices? And of course, how will it impact on the workforce? Do you really understand the consequences, and are there any unintended consequences, particularly if you are looking at relationships with third-party providers? If you've got a contractual arrangement, for example, with a trust to provide some of the staff, how will your restructuring impact on the trust? And we'll come to contracting in a moment about responsibility, but you really do need to think through those steps. It could be that you need to change the employment terms of your workforce, and it might be that's a workforce redeployment. Failure to do any of this and to follow good employment practice, though, could potentially open you up to claims from workforce, particularly if there's any allegations of unfair dismissal. And in worst case scenario, discrimination. Hopefully that wouldn't be applicable, but you kind of need to be wary just in case you are making a workforce of kind of protected characteristics. So if we then look at you make that decision, you think, okay, we do need to proceed and with a redundancy scenario. You need to ensure that you follow the appropriate employment law processes for redundancy. And so often we see situations in which the outcome is predetermined. So they think, yes, we will definitely need to make this workforce redundant. Well, if you fail to follow kind of due process, that could be opening you up to all sorts of potential claims and problems in the future. The first step to consider is whether or not you've actually identified the correct pool of staffing. So how do you pull them together? How are they defined? And simply saying it's the PCN staff or the ARRS workforce may not be sufficient. If that ARRS workforce, let's take the example of a random selection of physiotherapists. If there's any physiotherapists on here, I'm not saying you're the ones at risk. It's just the first thing that came to my mind. If you are working across a PCN, is it certain that any physiotherapists employed directly by any of the other practices aren't in the same pool? Is there any risk that they are sharing working patterns? Are they both doing enhanced access, for example? Is there a risk, therefore, that making a change that's deemed a PCN change could actually be a change across multiple practices? In which case, how is that going to be coordinated, and who is potentially responsible for that? You then need to undertake appropriate consultations with the workforce. Whilst most workforce in primary care are unlikely to be part of a union, it isn't definite, and there may well be a requirement to do a large-scale consultations, so that needs to be reviewed. You need to ensure that any selection process is fair and objective, and you need to just make certain you put in all the procedures to ensure that you do not have a risk of unfair dismissal. If problems do arise, then we need to look at where responsibility and liability actually sits. Ultimately, who needs to be paying for the costs of these situations? To consider that, we need to look at how your PCN may be structured. Many of you may be familiar with this diagram. It's been around since 2019 when the BMA kind of summarized what PCNs might look like. It still remains a good snapshot of the potential structures, even if the terminology might have changed slightly over the years. So we'll look at the first kind of categories, which are practice-based models. If you are providing a service, a PCN, which is based on individual practices, so you've got either a lead practice that employs everybody, or you have split employment across multiple practices in the PCN. This becomes an absolute nightmare if you do not have it clearly structured and very clear obligations in your documentation as to who is liable. The lead practice, in most cases, will be primarily liable. They are, after all, the employer. They are the ones with the employment contract. And in a flat practice network, you might have several kind of interlapping employment contracts across multiple entities for the employee, and breaching one could have an impact on breaching the others, or simply not make them sustainable. The next step down then would need to be looking at your network agreement, specifically Schedule 5. What does it say? Does it say that this is a shared liability and shared responsibility? It should do, but not all do. If that was the case, then you can split that responsibility between all the practices, and all the practices therefore need to know what they might have to be paying for. In more advanced structures, you might have a cost and liability sharing agreement, which actually details exactly where the liabilities might sit. If the decision does arise that you're going to be making redundancies, if there's any breach in the procedures and processes, is there a risk that one of the practices that might have caused the breach has actually adopted and taken on all the liability on behalf of the PCN for failure to comply with the agreed procedures? Hopefully that would not be the situation, but it is certainly foreseeable, particularly under one of these models of a flat practice or a lead provider situation. It is really difficult if this is going to be driven by just one or two practices and the other practices do not agree. You really need to ensure that there is consistency in the decision making. So let's look at the next model, which I've referred to as the contractor model. This is a scenario in which you are either kind of buying in the services through a third party, might be a trust, for example, or your local GP federation, or you might have, of course, incorporated your PCN. Where does the liability sit for that? A primary liability always sits with the employer. So in those scenarios, the liability is likely to sit with either the incorporated vehicle, the NHS trust, or the federation. And this should be governed by the terms of whatever subcontracts you've arranged with those entities. More often than not, there are not clear obligations or powers about redundancy situations. And instead, what you'll be looking at is a request for a service change. If there is a request for a service change, you'll need to say, okay, what's the impact of that? Is there a risk that making these changes might result in staff trooping back to the practices, and therefore the practices end up with the same staff in the same situation as the other structure? Or are there defined indemnities in place that offers the protection that you can make these changes? Also, bear in mind that many of your contractors might be charities who might have kind of fairly significant different terms from those that we're used to in the NHS, and that might again impact on the level of liability of the practices within the PCN. The next model is the single practice PCN. Now, this one is fairly straightforward, to be honest. It's normally business as usual. Any other change they'd make as a single business would need to be applied, and therefore I'm not going to focus too much on that one. It's same issues apply, but they're likely to be doing that already. Okay, so just moving on to the second question, I could be a little bit quicker now. Does the increased access to online services create a risk to practices? Now, the increase is very much, the increased access is supposed to be for non-urgent situations. So it's non-urgent bookings, it's for medication queries and administration requests. So it shouldn't be something that's too significant. But the most important issue here is actually in the guidance. It says this is subject to necessary safeguards in place to avoid urgent clinical requests erroneously submitted online. It is recognised that if there is a urgent matter that gets that sneaks through and nobody picks it up, this could cause major issues. And we saw this in the rush to online services back in, say, 2020. So this is not going to be brought in until October at the earliest, and it is supposed to have detailed kind of safety netting in place that comes with that. We will learn more about this in the future, and I suspect all the clinical systems are rapidly working on solutions for this to help manage it. If that isn't delivered, then I wouldn't be at all surprised if we see a delay on this being implemented. Next question we had was, what are changes expected for GP Connect access? Again, this is one which is maybe hasn't kind of got the attention that other matters have, but it's quite an interesting one. There's a couple of different points. First of all, access should be given to all NHS contract holders. In some areas, that's already the case with your NHS trusts, and that makes perfect sense. It improves the ability for record keeping between entities, reduces the risk of kind of lost referrals, etc. The next one is about pharmacy and community pharmacy, where they are going to be having access to send consultation summaries into the GP practice workflow. This might not be an issue if you've got good workflow optimization processes in your practice. However, it might be a situation where you end up with things being added to your system that haven't been checked, that you need to be wary of, particularly from a data protection side, but also patient safety. The bit I really wanted to flag, though, is that it makes reference that access should be open to private providers as well if they've got the appropriate consent from their clients, also known as your patients. This is a real opening kind of change in the situation, because it will for the first time give private providers access to the complete medical record, which is not something that has happened in the past, and is often seen as a little bit of almost a defense from making too much kind of moving privately. It's not clear exactly who's included. This might just be the hospitals, for example. But hopefully it will improve care all round. Further guidance is expected on this, but there is nothing that says that that isn't going to be implemented fairly quickly with the new contract being released. So the fourth area I wanted to mention was about the implementation of a patient safety strategy impact on practices. Now, this was published last year. There's a load of different kind of terms within it, which I've just highlighted here because you'll need to get used to hearing these, I have no doubt. It's built upon changes in patient safety that the trusts have already gone through since 2022. In fact, the first iterations were in 2018, and there are some ICB areas who have adopted this already anyway. Patient safety is a major concern in regards to primary care. It represents about £100 million a year from NHS resolution. It's about 21% of all their claims, although there's only about 20 to 30,000 reported incidents each year, which is relatively low if you think about the amount of activity. So the concern is that there's a major underreporting. So LFPSE is Learn from Patient Safety Events Service. This is an IT system that you all need to sign into to report events. They're not all going to be serious incidents. It could be any type of event to encourage kind of learning from matters from minor to major. This replaces some of the older systems which you might be familiar with, and I believe the obligation to start signing up to this will commence as of April. The PSIRF, the Patient Safety Incident Reporting Framework, is a document produced in 2022. It's been adopted by trusts and any holder of the NHS standard contract. It is a significant change in how incidents are managed. Again, it removes the concept of serious incidents and just replaces it with the principle of being able to report any type of incident at any time. It is something that Hempsons will be doing a series of designed for primary care in the future, and so please stay in contact in relation to that. The next one, PSP, is the Patient Safety Partner. Every practice will be expected to have at least 2 PSPs. These are lay people, and the expectation is that people from the commission, from your PPG, might do this work. They will be able to advise and consult on any patient safety issues that are identified within a practice. The recommendation also is that this could be done at scale. So PCNs might be able to deliver this on behalf of multiple practices. So 2 people across a whole PCN. There is going to be a whole range of new mandatory training in these areas, which is due to be published later in the year. Again, I think it's accessible already, but I'm not 100% certain on that. Stay in tuned for that one. Next is a patient safety specialist. This is the ICB specialist who will be keeping an oversight on all of these functions and will supposed to be engaging with all practices to ensure that they've implemented these changes. And finally, the GPSS, which is an NHS General Practice Staff Survey, which is a new form of national survey or an amended version, which will be expected to be rolled out across practices in the future. I say this is a single paragraph about just adopting the patient safety strategy. It's actually quite a significant commitment, though, and it's something that I feel hasn't got the attention that it should do. When you go into it, you'll see there's multiple links and additional documents and all sorts of information in there, which will take quite a long time to get through. But as they certainly us at Hempsons are looking at supporting kind of increased learning and the implementation of this. So stay tuned. Okay, and on that, I will hand over to Monty.
Thanks very much, Rob. Excellent. Can you all see that okay?
Yep.
Yeah, brilliant. I'll try and take you through this as quickly as possible. My name is Montrose Bill, Medical Malpractice Manager for MIAB. We've been trading for about 22 years now, and we specialise in GP practices, comfort GP practices, dental sector, pharmacy sector, and the optical sector. But we've done a lot of work across the GP practice area and primary care networks as well. We work with a lot of associations, so the majority of our work is actually dealt with on a day-to-day basis. We receive quite a few inquiries from clients in this space. So the next slide really just details the major changes which are happening across the GP practice. I really want to focus on your ARRS and the increased funding which you're going to receive for your IT. So hopefully I'll be able to talk about the insurance implications around that. But I'll start you with the basics. The majority of people sitting on this call will have a surgery policy in some shape or form. With increased funding, that's probably the first place where you're going to use it. So the kind of things which I would imagine that you would need to do is look at things, your annual turnover, and that could affect things like your business interruption cover. If there's any request for an increase in your public liability, if you're undertaking any kind of community care contract or local council contract, that would need to be increased as well. We would also say maybe potentially look at your locum insurance cover as well. Our understanding is there's going to be a reduction, or sorry, an increase in the amount of reimbursement, weekly reimbursement provided for staff working within your practice. So it may be a case of you can either reduce your business overheads, or if you're actually taking on additional staff, you might need to actually increase your overheads as well. So we've spoken earlier on about the increase, the rise in or the digitization of healthcare, and the increase in the amount of infrastructure that you have in the practice. Rob touched upon GP Connect earlier on. There'll be things like Blink ARRS, the use of HIDE, your online telephony, more and more online consultations. So, I mean, health has been heavily reliant upon IT in recent years. Healthcare data is often targeted by cyber criminals. Your medical records contain things like names, date of births, addresses, and many other types of data that hackers can easily use, or they can sell to get fraudulent accounts. Also, your medical devices is an early entry point for hackers because they can use that patient data to actually stop your system from working. So it stop your medical personnel from actually being able to practice. So all of this makes the healthcare sector really vulnerable to the risk of cyber. Healthcare probably sits, or currently sits, in the top 5 industries who are most at risk of cyber. We do have some good working examples as well. We recently had a practice dealing with an adoption case. Both the new guardian and the original parent were registered at the same practice. It was actually flagged by a social worker because the practice had inadvertently sent some information on to the new parent. So the practice system hadn't properly been updated. So of course the guardian was extremely upset. On that particular case, which went to the ICO, there was £10,000 paid out in damages, and there's still actually a reserve with the insurers now in terms of solicitors' fees on that as well. There were numerous other cases as well. We've obviously previously flagged the Synovis account early in 2024, where the hospitals in London, their systems were actually brought down, had to cancel operations, had to cancel appointments, couldn't actually practice, and that actually cost millions. I've attached a link which you can see later on, which will actually give you a bit more information. It's quite a good article written by the BMA as well. So we'd highly recommend that you do consider protection for your cyber. Practices are common targets simply because you're using systems which could potentially be out of date. The fact that ransomware is one of the key crimes which hackers are actually introducing into practice. They're aware that you need to actually continue to use your system in order to see patients, so you're more likely to pay. When actually dealing with clients on a day-to-day basis, we do get quite a lot of objections around cyber, and these are the usual ones which we need to tackle. I'll start at the top and work my way around. The fact that you do tend to outsource your IT, or that you're using the NHS system, even if you do have a breach, there's nothing in an NHS contract or in your third-party contract to actually state that they can actually deal with the liability or the outcome of a cyber attack. There will be some contract restraints in there. And as I've already shown, that not all of the issues that you'll actually face will be IT related. In terms of yourselves actually being targeted, they're not actually targeting you. They're actually targeting the data that you use, which is very, very valuable to them. Again, smaller businesses are what we deem low-hanging fruit. You may not be overly focused on cyber. You're there to actually see the patient themselves. But what we've been told is 50% or practice and suffered some sort of data breach, whether it's by someone inadvertently sending out an email, whether it's by your system actually having a virus input into it as well. There's also the fact that practices still have paper records as well. It could be that there's employee misbehavior, or you could have lost a laptop, which someone has access to as well. I think when it comes to cyber, you really need to be looking at what would be the cost to you if your system was actually went down and you were unable to trade. But when it comes to the NHS, that's the key question. But the NHS themselves, they're actually the data owner, but you are deemed a GP practice, PCN, or healthcare provider. You are deemed the data processor, controller, so you'll have multiple responsibilities under GDPR. And it'd obviously be remiss to think that the NHS would actually be able to assist you in terms of compensating for any cyber episode. They obviously won't get involved if there's any type of human error as well. But we do suggest looking at an actual cyber liability policy. And those are the covers on the right, which you would actually get. And I'll quickly run you through those. I purposely listed them because you could actually lift that and show it to your third-party provider or to the NHS, just to say, are we actually covered for these things? In terms of incident response, you're far too busy on a day-to-day basis to be having to contact everybody who's actually been affected. In terms of data breach, they'll have specialist solicitors who could deal with the regulators for you. Most insurance policies nowadays, they'll actually provide you with a risk assessment from the outset, whereby they would actually go into your system, look at its frailties, identify any areas for support where they can actually make your system better, so it'll mitigate any future risks for you as well. As I said previously, if you're using if you outsource your IT or using another IT provider, they still won't be able to pay for any damages in terms of any cyber breaches, any downtime as well. And one of the things which I haven't added onto there, which I should have done, which is cover for tech E&O, which is your tech errors and omissions. A lot of the medical devices you use, you're predicting results with them, or you're using them for actual patient well-being, so to speak, or consultation. So that means if there's any kind of bodily injury as a result of the kit that you're using, that wouldn't, again, normally be covered by the NHS. If it's done through a cyber event, you would need a cyber policy to mitigate that. But as I stated previously, we've been working with PCNs now since their launch, seeing how they've evolved through the different care models which Rob mentioned earlier on. Obviously, there'll be an increase in your workforce, the greater activity across the network. It will all depend who your staff are actually employed by as to who actually assumes responsibility. That's why having a bespoke policy could actually work for you. So that's something which you would need to check with your provider, and we'd be happy to give you a bit more advice around that. In terms of if you're actually incorporated, we've got a specific policy which would look at the day-to-day management of contracts, offering you professional indemnity cover, covering all your staff while they're working across the network, which is the employers and public liability cover, and then also providing management liability cover as well. Additional to that, if you've got any staff who require cover around CNSGP, which will cover the primary care aspect, we can always pick up cover for the regulatory cover as well, those things which are not covered by the scheme. And the last slide is really just focusing on the day-to-day management of an actual business. Alongside cyber cover, we'd recommend that you do look at a management liability policy, because it will pick up those things which are not covered by any treatment type of risk. So everybody who's taken a decision on behalf of the business, anyone who's in a position of responsibility, that you can be deemed liable for the decisions that you take. So any allegations of wrongdoing could actually be directed at yourselves. So a director and officer's policy would actually pick that up, would cover you for fines. It includes cover for things like tax investigation. Obviously, you're going to be handling funding. It will pick up the whole HR piece as well, which is the employment practice liability. You may have a policy in place already with the likes of Peninsula, but they don't actually do the risk transfer element. So this would actually do that for you. And if there's any claims which are directed directly at the business itself, that would be picked up by the corporate liability. So that's really just a whistle-stop tour of the kind of things which you might need to consider with the new GP contract. Obviously, it's worth you having a review. Probably covered off a few things there which will need to go into a great deal more detail, but I'd be happy to do so and answer any questions. That's all I need to say for now.
Thank you, Monty. I don't know if you could have a look at the chat. There might be some that some of the questions that you could answer in the chat if you started from Dawn Moore's question at 1344. Would that be all right?
Yeah. Let's have a look.
While you're doing that, we've had one question that I think we might come on to before our sort of final question, which loads of you submitted to us, which was, do PCNs have a future? The question that I lifted out of the chat that I thought we could talk about a bit more was about online consulting. And the question, how does the online consultation requirements sit with the BMA guidelines for safe working guidance? So the thing with online access at the moment, sorry, I made some notes, so that's why my eyes are kind of dipping down a bit, is at the moment, as far as I'm aware, with the systems that I use, there's no kind of differentiation between turning off same day urgent stuff and turning off what they're calling the routine stuff and the medication queries and the sick note queries and the administrative queries. You either turn your system on or you turn it off. So there's going to have to be something that sorts out that. And even if there is something that sorts out that and defines it, well, how are you defining what's urgent and same day and what's not? And is there a risk that some stuff gets through as routine and actually isn't and is an urgent or same day thing? But regardless of all of that, the BMA has said that their safe working guidance remains, and it remains because it's safe working guidance, and what is safe isn't going to change. So I know that some LMCs are saying to their practices already, look, if this goes ahead and there's lots of caveats put in place, including the date being the 1st of October, but other caveats about how we need to work with the software suppliers to find a system that does work. So if it does go ahead, then I've seen and heard some LMCs saying that what they will then recommend to practices is that you need to maintain your BMA safe working, and therefore the only way that you can handle the routine requests that come through the online consulting software, if you've maxed out with your safe working, is to create a waiting list with an infinite, I guess, time limit on it. So that's the kind of thoughts that are going around at the moment. Rob, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that.
I completely agree. I feel like this is one of those areas where the concept of safe kind of safeguarding is easier said than done, but I suspect it will be driven by technical solutions, and there will not be an obligation to sign up to this until that has has passed the test from the kind of negotiator's perspective. So we shall see.
Yes, it would have to pass the sniff test with the BMA's GPC as well, wouldn't it? Thanks, Rob. So to move on to our final question now with our 5 minutes that we've got left, do PCNs have a future? And for this, I thought I'd start by sharing you the contents of what Wes Streeting put in writing to GPC England just last week. He's happy to reaffirm this government's commitment to working with the GPC England to secure the new substantive GP contract that we said we want, based on collaborative work, blah, 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 to establish a modern general practice at the heart of a neighbourhood health service. So there's quite a few nods in that to, shall we say, at scale working. And we've got PCNs now that are 6 at least years into existence, and we've got other at scale providers in general practice that have been even longer in existence. And some of these are employing many people, and some of these are recognised legal entities. So my thoughts are that whether we will have primary care networks called primary care networks operating to the same requirements with this new GP contract, I'm not sure, but I think there will be some form of at-scale working based around what we currently have. What would you say, Rob?
I completely agree, and I would actually potentially go a little bit firmer than that in saying that I suspect PCNs or whatever goes to replace them with rebranding will have to exist to be part of the kind of next step of integrated neighbourhood teams and this concept of the neighbourhood health service. For those of you who are not familiar, these are kind of recurring themes that have been in place for over several reports. The Darcy report in September specifically mentions increased focus on the neighbourhood NHS. There was a kind of think tank paper by a group called the IPPR, Commission on Health and Prosperity, in September, basically the week after the Darcy report, which had lots of references to things such as a neighbourhood health service and neighbourhood health providers. And this is quite an influential group from a kind of Labour perspective in particular. And a lot of things that they've referenced are kind of coming through in the documentation. And the NHS Confederation has written some very interesting papers on the case for neighbourhood health and care. So there's everything is pointing towards the neighbourhood. Practices who are not party to that and who are actively in a difficult situation when they actively just want to be on their own, I think will be in a difficult situation because they might find themselves isolated and they might lose out on the kind of funding opportunities in the future. Exactly what that looks like, we don't know, but I think the 10-year vision or strategy or whatever it's called is likely to be a significant kind of guidance on that in the future. I've just noticed someone pop up going PCN, primary care neighbourhoods. It could happen. That seems logical. One thing I would say is, though, I am hearing for the whole discussion about redundancies, there is this kind of small group relatively of PCN managers who are saying, or PCNs are coming to an end, there won't be any fun, there's no justification for them in the future. We, as represented by the fact that we can now do anything we like with our ARRS staff and to completely restructure it, I feel that is missing a massive point, that there is still massive funding in the PCN work itself. There's still lots of collaborative obligations, and all the INT work has only just started, which I think is going to be the real focus of the new contract. That wording in Wes Streeton's letter about collaborative work, it's not by coincidence. That is what the new contract will be focusing on, I have no doubt. So let's see how that develops.
Thanks, Rob. And to pick up on Gary's comment in the chat, he's saying that PCNs and federations should sort of position themselves to be there, ready for when neighbourhood working takes off, whatever that's going to look like. And that's sort of what we've got confirmed here by the Health Secretary. I'm sure community trusts and other providers will be dying to be the heart of the neighbourhood health service, but what he's put there is that he wants general practice to be at the heart of the neighbourhood health service. So maybe that sounds less threatening to hear, that we are to be at the heart of it.
Very much so.
Yeah. Thank you so much to everybody that's tuned in. Please complete our feedback form if you can. I know you might have to dip off and don't have time to scan the QR code, but we'll send it out to you afterwards. And it's just so that we can make these webinars as useful as possible in the future. If you'd like to find out more about the well-led provider, There's a QR code there that you can scan. That's our email address. We've got a sort of free trial of our software, etc., etc. And if you want to find out more about Redmore Health and how it can help you with your digital transformation, which might be more and more important as time goes on, particularly with this new GP contract, then there's some details about that here too. Otherwise, you'll hear from us soon with the slides recording, and I think we're going to try and collate all of the answers to the questions as well. And thanks, Monty, for answering all of those in the chat too. I hope it's been useful, and have a good rest of your days, everyone.
Thanks, Phil. Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. Bye.